Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right and see the slide that I have in front of me. I'm Jim Preen, Crisis Management Director at YUDU Sentinel, and we make crisis communication software for those who don't know. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. Today, I'm going to be talking with Chris Phillips about safety and security during lockdown. And it's become a bit of a tradition on these webinars where I ask people where they're listening from. It's also a bit of a trick on my part to get you to use the Q&A box. So why don't you pop your hometown or the country that you're listening from in the Q&A box to see who's here. It's also talking of Q&A, talking of questions and so forth. I'd really welcome that you ask questions as we go along. People are putting stuff in already. Okay, not too far away so far. We've got various from Simon from the UK, Andrew from Staffordshire. We got Joanna from the Herts Essex borders. Okay, we got Mark from Thames Valley. We've got Silvio, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, from London. Tim in Essex, Alan in Cheshunt. We've got Basil is calling in from Jakarta in Indonesia. That's very interesting because we quite often have a few people far flung. So I guess the person who wins, and at the moment it's Basil, is the person who is furthest away from London, which is where I'm talking from today. I've got Paul here, Birmingham City Centre. Neil says good afternoon all the way from Newcastle. Afternoon, Jim and Chris, and that's from Chris Tsikalis, who we both know, in fact, from Victoria Beard there. We've got someone. We've got someone from Cape Town in South Africa. Excellent. And we've got Lorraine from where? From Surrey in the UK. So it's a good mix of people we've got there. So I'm pleased to see that you're all using the Q&A box. So as I say, while the webinar progresses, while I'm talking with Chris, if you've got a question to ask Chris, if you've got a comment about something that he says, then just pop that in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer those questions. Well, talking of my guest, I'm delighted to welcome Chris Phillips, who's here to help us understand the safety and security implications surrounding COVID-19, which is leaving its mark on every aspect of society. Many of you will know Chris, but here's a very brief resume about his illustrious career. So Chris, welcome. Could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself? Just flesh that out a bit.
Yes, thanks, Jim, and welcome everybody. It's a great pleasure to speak to you all today. Well, a little bit about me. So quite a lot of years of experience of policing and right through the remit of public order policing, so riot policing, through to general policing, the streets of London, and then finally ending up looking after Richmond Borough, which is one of the big boroughs in London, where we had some decent crime activity. But then I got into counterterrorism, and counterterrorism really is what I'm known for, I suppose. I became a counterterrorism security advisor, which meant that I advised events, sporting events, pop concerts, and anything else that needed some counterterrorism advice on behalf of the police. I then ended up applied for a job within the National Counterterrorism Security Office, where I headed that up for 7 years. And during that time, really, that's where I built up my knowledge around protecting crowded places. But not only crowded places, protecting actually sites such as pathogen and toxin labs that we've seen causing, I think, a bit of this problem where pathogens may have escaped. We don't know yet, but I think that's what it will probably end up being. And also locations with radioactive sources. So protecting the critical national infrastructure and crowded places is kind of where I ended up. Having retired a few years ago now, I've been working in the private sector, giving the same kind of advice really, but obviously being paid for it, which is slightly better. And here I am today, still happily trundling along, giving advice, hopefully putting a view on things that others don't necessarily see.
That's great, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick question for you. So when you were part of the national, or heading the National Counterterrorism Security Office, what does that mean? Does that mean you're working with MI5? How does that, does that kind of dovetail?
Yeah, we were co-located with MI5. So we
Ah,
used, and part of MI5 is called the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure. We were based within that group, and our job really was to provide the on-the-ground advice for critical national infrastructure. But also, I developed the crowded places strategy and actually worked out how we could target harden our cities, our stadiums, our shopping centres, uh, and our hospitals, funny enough, from potential terrorist attack.
okay. All right. Excellent. Well, I suppose you were in and out of Thames House then, which is about half a mile away from where I'm speaking from.
Yeah, I'm based there for 7 years.
Oh, okay. All right. Fine. Fine. But I'm just over the river from there. Just to say that we have someone else listening in, and this is a good one. We got Jorge from Orlando, Florida, and I'm guessing the weather's going to be a little bit better in Orlando, Florida, than it is in London today. We seem to have a kind of rainstorm coming in here. All right. Let's get underway here. Now, there have been concerns about public order breaking down if lockdown goes on for some time. And I'm going to ask Chris about that. But first, I'd like to ask you, the audience, is this something that you've thought about? And I'm going to do this by launching a poll, which I have now launched. I hope you can see that. Chris, do you see the poll? I'm not.
Yes, I've got it.
You got it. If perhaps you would vote as well.
Well,
So,
I'm going to vote yes.
you okay? That's interesting. Well, hold your fire on that because we want to ask you about that. So, what have we got here? We've got. Oh yeah. Okay. Excellent. So, 53% of people have voted. Could we get a few? Oh, 70%. It's leapt up. Well, this is quite interesting, I must say. Okay. Chris, can you see the results?
No, I can't.
Okay.
And I'm not allowed to vote apparently either, which is
oh, right. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. What are you expecting the results to be? I'm just about to close the poll and show you, but just out of interest, what do you think? You think people think there is going to be?
I think your perception will be from where you live and the position that you're in. Really, I think we all come from slightly different perceptions of this.
Well, I'm ending the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. Now, can you guys see this? I think you can. Yes?
Ooh.
No?
Yeah.
You can see it. Okay, yes, Tim is telling me he can. So there you go. It's a big 83% of people believe that there will be some kind of social unrest. So Chris, let's get your thoughts on this. I mean, lockdown's causing many stresses and strains. And we're seeing social unrest in the US, to a lesser extent in Italy. What about here? Do you think it's likely here or what? Let's hear your thoughts on that, please.
Well, I think, if I can just go back a stage, really, one of the most misleading cliches about this coronavirus issue is that it treats us all the same. It doesn't. It really doesn't. Neither medically, economically, socially, or psychologically. I think what's going to happen is it will, in particular, exacerbate any pre-existing conditions of inequality. And where you have inequality, you tend to get unrest. And I think before long, and to some extent, certainly in the UK, and it's quite an interesting fact, we only have riots in the UK in the summer. It's strange that people don't want to go out in the rain to riot. So to some extent, the weather may have a bit of an issue with this, and play a bit of a part in this. But I think it is going to cause social turmoil. I think we've seen it before. There is also already social unrest.
Well, I see there's some degree of kind of vigilantism in some country areas where people are trying to stop city dwellers coming onto their patch. That's the one. I think I've seen that. I don't know if there's anything else happening at the moment, Chris.
So, well, in the UK, I think we've been okay up until now. But of course, we're at the very early stage of this still. I know we're 4 or 5 weeks in, but actually that's still an early part of this. And what we've got is these inequalities multiplying. And one thing you can guarantee, if you're one of the poorer paid members of society, it's one of the least types that you can work from home. You're unlikely to be able to work from home if you're not earning very much. And these people will suffer more probably than those at the top end of the scale. And and that inequality often finds its way through to disorder.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what could trigger it. What's your thought on triggering disorder?
Well, I think to some extent it depends on whether we're able to get back reasonably quickly and whether people can pick up their lives. But of course, we've I mean, going across the world here, we've seen in France the last 100 weeks, there's been constant attacks on the government from the Gilets Jaunes. And that's in a country that's got a similar sort of policing style really to the UK. Although we haven't got enough police in the UK to deal with any outbreaks of problems.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I just should say that we got Sarah joining us from Virginia in the US as well. So hi, Sarah. I mean, obviously it's a bit different in more authoritarian states such as China, which can enforce lockdown laws. But there are limitations in the West when it comes to controlling groups of people. There've already been some criticism of some police forces being a bit heavy-handed. I mean, what's your take on that aspect of it?
Yeah, and that's the interesting point, I think. I think one of the reasons that we were late into lockdown was because I don't believe that the government thought that people would do it unless they wanted to, unless they believed in it.
I totally agree. I was really surprised. I thought, are people really going to follow this? But I guess when there's the possibility of dying, then people do follow it.
But I think it needed a good 3 weeks of being persuaded that this was something they needed to do. And I think the government were very slow. I mean, if you hear Boris Johnson when he was first talking about this, and someone asked a question about, will police be arresting people that don't follow this? He was almost surprised. I don't think he believed that this would ever be needed. And I think that's one of the reasons we went into this quite late and quite slowly, simply because the government felt they had to persuade people that it was necessary.
Yeah. I agree. I'm surprised. Because largely it's holding pretty well so far, the lockdown here. I don't know if anybody wants to comment who are listening from overseas, how lockdown is working there, but I'd quite be interested to hear any comments about that. Is particularly in the US, say, where there have been sort of demonstrations against lockdown. Here so far it's holding pretty well. I mean, there have been some egregious examples where it hasn't, but so far so good, I think. Chris, any more thoughts on that?
No, I think what we've got to be aware of is the probability that there are going to be people that are cheesed off with this. I mean, everyone's cheesed off to it to some extent, but this inequality of, listen, if I live in a house with a garden, I'm fine. I can get out in the sunshine and sit there. But an awful lot of people in our society, and some of our city centres are tinderboxes. These people are living in apartments, flats, condominiums, whatever you want to call them, and they cannot get out. They're not able to get out. And I just don't think in the UK, I guarantee in the UK, we do not have enough police to deal with a wide outbreak of disorder.
And it's certainly in the initial stages, it takes pretty sensitive policing as well, doesn't it? You don't want to stoke the fire, if you know what I mean.
No, but what you've seen is people complaining that the police aren't doing anything about those walking about the streets,
right?
And then another group of people complaining that they're being authoritarian and doing too much. So it's a very difficult balancing line that they've had to take. They will make mistakes. Police will make mistakes, and what I fear is if this goes on into the future, more mistakes will be made, and of course you will have one of these city centres that decides that they don't want to follow the rules anymore.
Okay, we've got some points here, Chris, which I'd like to share with you, please. As we go, in Indonesia, soft lockdown is failing as so many millions are day workers who face a simple choice: work and eat with the risk of infection, or lock down and starve. I mean, that's pretty brutal, right?
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying, that it's okay for countries such as China, who potentially have got the policing to lock these places down, But I mean, if you live in one of the slums in India, or maybe even Cape Town, around Cape Town, I know there's some bad ones there. If you live in one of those, you haven't got the opportunity to lock down. Really, you're living in a shed with 5 other members of your family, and you certainly haven't got any choice around masks and things. And so I think that whilst this Western countries may get control of this over the next 6 months, it's going to be much more difficult for African nations in particular, and other poorer countries with a big poor contingent of people, very, very poor contingent of people to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Joanna makes we got quite a few points here, Chris, I'd like to talk to you about. Joanna makes a really good point, I think. In my opinion, there will be an increased risk of breakdown of the lockdown if there's no clear strategy for a phased return at the end of the current lockdown. People are getting twitchy.
Oh, absolutely. And you can feel that, can't you? I think there's been a palpable feel that this week we needed to hear something that's going to see that light at the end of the tunnel. But of course, those countries that have tried to come out a little bit, such as Germany, are finding that there's almost an immediate pickup in the virus numbers. So it is a really difficult thing. And this is where you kind of wouldn't pay to be a politician, I think, because it's whatever you do is not going to be seen as doing the right thing.
We've got what else we got? We got Steve as comment. I don't know, maybe you've seen Steve's comment. I don't know. It says it's to all panelists, so you may have seen it. But he's basically agreeing you. Enforcement of the lockdown has varied police force by police force, but most seem to have enforced it as a means of last resort, using dialogue and persuasion first. He says, I agree with Chris. It's a very fine balancing act as to how this is policed proportionately. It's a tough call for officers, isn't it?
It is a nightmare, and it's a legislation that's been made in a matter of days. Normally legislation, and I can only speak on the UK's behalf here, usually legislation is looked over for weeks and months before it comes into force. This has come in pretty much over the course of a few days. It's got the term reasonable. Now, if I sat in a room with all the people in this room, in this webinar at the moment, and asked them what their view of reasonable was, we'd all have slightly different examples. We'd have different opinions on that. So the term reasonable is just a complete nightmare for policing.
And Matt raises an interesting point, which as a former copper, Chris, I'm sure you'll have a thought about. The police are being asked to deal with homelessness. Do you think that they will be expected to deal with more non-enforcement issues after the lockdown eases?
Well, to be quite honest, again, I'm speaking from the UK, UK's perspective. The police are the catch-all of everything, and of course, what we've had in the last 15 years in the UK is cutbacks in all services, including mental health. And if you speak to police officers these days, they spend half their patrol time dealing with people with mental health issues, with nowhere to take them. And it's the same with those that are homeless. It's the same with everything. They are the catch-all of everything. And of course, if you take away the safety nets that we used to have, then the police end up dealing with that.
Yeah, indeed. And there's another cultural issue, Chris, which I'm sure you will have a thought about. This is from Basil, who you'll recall is in Indonesia, in Jakarta. And the impact of Ramadan will put stress on all response and recovery strategies. These cultural differences are going to be hugely difficult, aren't they?
Yeah, Basil, I've been out in Indonesia, in Jakarta actually, for two different years during Ramadan. And it's a very difficult thing to do, because people are more stressy as well. Certainly as the time goes on, those people that are fasting correctly as per the Quran really, they do suffer during this time, and the stresses and strains of that won't help this situation.
Chris Sikalis is asking a question about physical security, but Chris, if you're listening, we're going to come to that in a little while in this talk. So we've got your question there. We will keep that question, but we're just talking about sort of lockdown at the moment. What else have I got here? A question from Orlando, tourism being hit very hard. And that we find they're not knowing how things are going to open up.
Yeah.
It's all opening up very, very slowly.
And if I can come in there, Jim,
go on,
because I think tourism is the thing that's going to be hit the worst for the longest. It's the last thing you can imagine, opening these sites. I think it's going to be quite difficult to open many of these tourist sites until they've got the vaccine. Simply because of the speed of spread. If you've got large groups of people congregating in the same place, the same with pubs and restaurants. I think they're going to be the last ones to be.
Completely. I've got friends who run the bar and restaurant and stuff, and they've got their head in their hands. I mean, how do you social distance in a bar? It's impossible.
It is impossible.
Neil asked a question. We are, and this is in the UK, we're starting to see an increase of persons traveling and leaving their homes. At what point do UK authorities step in, and what escalated measures can they take? That's a tricky question.
Yeah, well, Neil, I think they're really going to struggle to deal with that, because I just don't think they've got the policing available to them to deal with that. I think that I've always said from day one that the only way this will work is by personal and public pressure that people that people do the right thing rather than go out. But of course, that will only last for so long. And the moment people start thinking that I don't agree with what the government's doing, I don't think that the government is handling this properly, then that is when the problems start coming in. And that's when you will start seeing people go out and practice football in the park, or and groups form. Police officers have to try to go and deal with them. And the moment you get that, of course, you get this rub that can very quickly and easily turn into disorder.
Yeah, indeed. Gosh, we've got so many questions coming in here. I don't know whether to move on. Let's just do a couple more. Basil again, he's saying, could the UK see community security groups? I mean, we do have some of those in the UK, Chris, like the Jewish community have the community trust. Do you have any knowledge of that at all?
Well, I think it will be very difficult. I think you noticed about 3 weeks ago that the police actually requested those retired police officers, retired in the last 5 years, I think, to return to help them out, because they knew that their police officers would go ill as well. Their numbers would be down, and the requirement for patrol would increase dramatically. So I think we may, it's a bad thing. I think you've got to be careful that you don't move down the vigilante route. But I think communities will protect themselves, and that's when, if you don't trust the police to be able to protect you, if you don't if you don't think the courts are going to protect you, then you take matters into your own hands. And to some extent, that's got to be a bad thing. But of course, looking out for each other is another thing, and I think we have seen a lot of that. And that's one thing that communities have probably reformed over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I certainly in my little street here, we all sort of looking out for each other. It's one of those things, however awful this is, kind of hope this kind of stuff continues. Now, whether it will snap back to being as we were, I don't know. But the kind of caring nature of what's going on is welcome. And let's hope that, on a positive note, let's hope that stays with us. Chris, I've got another question for you. They keep coming. Tim is asking, I don't know how up to speed you are with current policing, but there are a few, this is Chris saying this, there are a few news reports stating police forces currently have around 15% of staff officers off sick, while the crime rate has dropped due to COVID, apart from domestic abuse, and we might talk about that. Do you think there will be a significant rise in crime after lockdown due to a rise in unemployment? And do you think the police have enough resilience to deal with it? That's a good question for you.
Well, the answer to the last question is, do they have enough resilience? Well, in the short term, yes. In the long term, no. Police are just like everyone else. They've got families that are probably getting ill, and they're having to isolate. I know a colleague, a friend of mine, an ex-colleague of mine, who is currently off sick because he's got the COVID. So the police are just like everyone else. They're losing resilience over this, and of course, the longer it goes on, the worse that problem will be. I think crime has gone down, and it's quite a simple answer actually. Certainly in the UK, a lot of our crime is caused by people going to the pub and getting drunk and doing stupid things afterwards. I mean, that's a big portion of the crime in the UK. No crowded places anymore, so there's very difficult to commit robberies and things like that.
And everybody's at home.
And everyone's at home, so your houses are pretty much secure whilst you're in them. But of course, we're going to see a growth in the number of people that just don't have any money after this, and that is always historically a precursor for extra problems. And I think we will see that, and I think companies do need to bear that in mind.
Indeed. And Mohammed Omar is saying here, more job losses will result in protests if the lockdown continues. How will the lockdown impact on the terror? We're going to talk about terrorism at the end of this. So perhaps let's just leave that. Let's just park that one there, because let's just move on a bit and just what about in this country, and I'm sure in every other country, the health service is, in the forefront of our mind at the moment. Do you have any insight on how the NHS in this country is handling security, and are there any lessons to be drawn from that?
Well, it's a massive rub, security and hospitals and the NHS, etc. Because of course the whole point of hospitals is they're supposed to be open, inviting places that try to help people and get people better. But of course, they have some really bad stuff kept in hospitals. I mean, the very virus that we're talking about now that's got around the world actually is being dealt with in laboratories across the UK, across the world, and those laboratories have to be protected. We've got radioactive sources used for treating people, particularly with cancer. Every hospital has got these things, and of course they are a very dangerous thing if they get into the wrong hands. So those sort of things need to be protected. But of course, the moment we get this an antiviral or a cure for this virus, then that will also be a very important and very stealable asset that, of course, the NHS will have to protect. And I remember we were considering this in the days of SARS, because the antiviral jabs that they were getting, of course, were very, 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 very precious, and in the wrong hands could have been stolen. Right. So we had to protect them. So we've got those things, but also we've got the hospitals themselves. Suddenly they are the focus of everything. They're the only crowded places left in our society. And they're the places that, if you were a terrorist or a criminal, they're ideal places to attack as well. So protecting the hospitals, the NHS, is a key part of this. And certainly as part of the critical national infrastructure, hospitals are very much up there with the places to be protected. But of course, they pay for their own protection, and that's a key.
I saw in a news article, and it actually hadn't occurred to me to think about it, but in the UK, we've got these big Nightingale hospitals, which are set up in sports stadiums, in hotels and so forth, to maintain a number of beds for the critically ill. And I noticed that there's a big Nightingale hospital in London. It's actually, there's only about 40 people in it, but it can take 4,000. And MI5s help them with security, Chris. You knew that, I guess, yeah? Yeah,
well, that would have been my old team that would do that. So all hospitals have advice from the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. They are crowded places, as I said, they've got radiation sources and pathogens in them, but also they are seen as potential targets. And across the world, where terrorists have acted, they've often acted in hospitals, or they've been the secondary target, because if you're going to attack something, then all the people that you've attacked in the first place will end up in that location. So hospitals do have to be defended, and the CPNI, the NATSO team, would have been down there actually trying to make sure that you couldn't drive a vehicle bomb into the hospital to cause more carnage.
Okay. Chris, gosh, we've got so many questions here. We've got to move on. Matt and Basil have basically put the same question, which is, if people get used to government interventions, how will this affect people's freedoms in the long term? If we do the track and trace app thing that they're using in Australia now, and it looks like we're going to use here, this could be a massive land grab by the government, on our civil liberties. But of course, there's a trade-off, isn't there? This can help protect us. And at the moment, it seems, once again, like lockdown, people are accepting of this. But how do you see this playing out in the long term, Chris? Because it's going to affect the police as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen all sorts of things with facial recognition being used on the streets in the UK. It's certainly used in China. And other countries are trying it out as well. So these sort of things, I think there's been a gentle drip of this anyway. And I think people are, certainly the younger generation, are more accepting of it. I think those that have seen, anyone that's lived in the old East Germany and USSR has a different opinion of this. And even Germany have real difficulties with this kind of thing. So it'll be different for different countries. I think I don't believe that certainly our government, either of our two potential governments, would want to do this for bad reasons. But of course, there is a big issue with this. But on the other side of this, we're all using phones that have got tracker devices in anyway. So to be quite frank with you, if the government and police actually have a reason to and want to, they can track you through your telephone. So these things already exist, and we accept them. But of course, we've got to be very careful we don't allow this to get into the wrong hands.
Indeed. Right, now, folks, we're going to move. Now, there are 3 questions waiting here, and from Chris, Paul, and Steve, and I've got them. It's all about security and so forth, and we're going to do that. But I just quickly want to talk a little bit about working from home, and I thought I want to launch another poll now. Most of you listening to this, I guess, are working from home, and we just quite like to find out how you like it. So I'm going to launch the poll here. This is just a bit of fun, really, but how are you finding working from home? I don't know. What's your thought on this one, Chris?
Well, I don't like working from home personally. I'd prefer to go into the office, but then again, do we all? It depends how hard you want to work these days. I mean, I'm a bit longer in the tooth, perhaps.
I mean, it is going to be. I mean, we're going to talk about this anyway, but there's obviously going to be a growth in home working after this. Well, I say obviously. I think there will.
Well, I definitely think there will, and I think people are going to be more unwilling to use public transport. We saw that after terrorist attacks, and I think we'll definitely see that after this.
Yeah, I totally agree. Any more votes, guys? We got 72%. Anybody else want to cast their vote? Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. We seem to be there. So I'm going to share the results. So there you go. Well, it's quite interesting. So there are some people, and I had a feeling we'd see this, who think this is great. I've got some colleagues where I work who have to travel a huge distance to get to work. And some of them must quite like just nipping from the bedroom to the office and making it easy. But most people, 60% say it's tolerable. I know I can give one example, and that's my wife, who absolutely hates it. Maybe it's because I'm around, I don't know. But she really likes the cut and thrust of the office. But anyway, there we are. So I think you can see that. I'm going to go on and ask you some questions. So what are the security risks associated with home working, Chris? You've got the physical security of people, and then there's document security, information security, cyber security. Give us your thoughts on that, if you would.
Well, let's take them bit by bit, actually. Yeah. So working from home security-wise, physical security is an interesting one, because whilst at the moment we're all working in our houses and flats and things, in due course this turns into working in cafes and bars and places like that. And I think there are some big issues with that, and particularly around Wi-Fi, use of Wi-Fi, security of your information that you are passing through, but also your own personal physical security. And of course, it depends how kind of important you are in the world of this stuff, but actually having things stolen, whether you're working from home and you've got you're in a domestic situation, which is very difficult. I think we've seen a growth, and I think someone mentioned it, a growth in domestic violence. If you're trying to work in that scenario, it's very difficult. And I think where businesses need to start thinking about this is where do their responsibilities start and end? And I'd be interested for people to come in to let us know actually where they think their business has responsibility for them when they're working from home. Because
I mean, I've just put the question up there. When people work from home, who's responsible? I think you made the point at some point, Chris. What if you have a heart attack when you're at work? Who's responsible there? You're at home, but you're working. It's difficult. And I just jump in here. Joanna has ticked me off and has said this is not working from home. It's working remotely during a lockdown. The reality of full productivity, full collaboration is different, home versus office. So I guess she has a point there.
Yeah, and I think there's different jobs. I mean, some jobs you can do some work from home. Some jobs are, maybe partially you can work remotely from the office. But of course, this again comes down to the type of job you're working in, and the lower paid, those people that are more likely to be disaffected, I think, are and potentially cause social unrest, are the ones that really have to go to work and won't get paid if they don't go and drive their taxi, or they don't go and go and sweep the roads or whatever it is. So those people are going to be more upset and more likely to be unhappy about the situation we're in.
No, I mean, for many years, I was a freelance journalist, and, I wonder what work I'd be getting now. I mean, maybe I would, I don't know, but it's tricky. I've got a good one from Steve here. This is just kind of a jokey one. My wife is with your wife on this, Jim. She hates me working from home. I'm apparently always under her feet. Well, watch out, Steve. Even though in the recent nice weather, I was working from my patio in the sunshine each day. So, you win some, you lose some, Steve, I guess.
And don't forget, let's not forget this as well, the mental health of people, because what we've got, it's okay, people with wives around, that's one thing, but actually if you're sitting in your flat or your house all on your own for 4 or 5 weeks and being expected to deliver results without help from other people, without the office banter perhaps that you're used to, or certainly the ability to de-stress, then I think we are gonna suffer from a lot of people suffering from mental health issues at the end of this.
Yeah, indeed. Just a few other comments from Mohammed saying working from home is the responsibility of the organization and they must revise policies to protect their employees. And I think he's bang on. There will be this growth in home working. And I think, HR departments and stuff are going to have to think deeply about this.
It would be a good poll question, actually. How many companies, how many of the people that are on this actually have got policies for people working from home or working remotely?
If I was clever, Chris, I would manage to set up another poll. I might be able to. Shall I do this? I think I can. Add a poll. All right.
Let me talk for a second, because I think it's quite interesting some of the issues that you get working remotely that you don't get working in the office. One of the big advantages, of course, is you don't have to do the travelling, but there are all sorts of other problems that you're going to confront. And if I were into cyber espionage, I would think that I would find it much easier to attack you from your home address or from a cafe and get valuable information from your workplace. So I think businesses need to be really up to speed on what they allow their people to do when they're away from the office.
Okay, so look, I've actually think I've managed to do this. Let's see if I've managed to do this. I'm going to put out another poll and let's see what our audience say. I may not have worded this perfectly, but here we go. I'm launching this poll now. Here we go. Can you see this? How many people? So basically, we're talking about people listening. How many companies and people who are listening currently have a working from home policy? We've got 36% of people have voted. If you keep on voting, I'm quite interested in seeing this. What's your thought on this, Chris? I'm going to test you again. Do you think most people?
Well, Well, no, I don't think they do. And if you take this to the next extreme, my understanding is that less than 50% of companies actually even have a crisis management plan. So actually changing policies quickly. Some of the people would very rarely have worked remotely, and are suddenly having to do that. So I doubt that all these companies are going to have that.
Gosh, we've got so many questions here. Okay, look, 81% of people have voted on this. So I'm going to end the poll now. And yeah, I don't know. Let's see what you think about this, Chris. So I'm going to share the results now. Can you see that?
Yeah, 59%.
So yes, almost 60%. So they do have a work from home policy. Okay, I don't know.
So there's a couple of simple questions on that.
Yeah.
When do you start work? And when do you finish work? When you are working, we'll call it from home at the moment because that's what we're doing. But so when do you start work and when do you finish work? How do you take your refreshment breaks? How does that operate? These are the sort of questions. What happens if you have an injury or something happens to the internet? I don't know. You lose internet. Are you still working? Are you not working? These are the sort of questions that you need to ask. And if you're a company that everyone has always gone into the office, if someone is taken ill and they're working from home and there's no one else in the house, and we use the extreme of a heart attack, how does the company respond, and how do they deal with it? I think these are questions that a lot of HR people are going to be asking themselves over the next few weeks.
I mean, what Steve is saying here, working from home remotely, we all have responsibility for our own safety and security, and for the security of, for example, our employers' IT, laptop, etc. However, all responsible employers must take responsibility for their employees' well-being. Certainly, my employers are very supportive and considering our welfare throughout this current crisis. I guess I absolutely share that, Steve, but I guess it depends what form that actually takes. And I have a suspicion people are making this up as they go along.
Yeah, just a point of interest. So when do you become the company's responsibility is a fascinating topic. I went to a briefing from some lawyers on this, and we were talking through going to a conference. Now, I know that we're not going to be going to a conference now, but if you walk out your door and on your way to your normal office, when do you think the time is that you become at work? Let me answer it for you because I know the answer. The time that you're walking through the front door.
You don't need me at all.
Yeah. No, but you walk through the front door of your office. That's the time that you are the responsibility of the business. If you are going to a conference, just say in another city, when is the time? At that time when you're going to that conference, when do you become the responsibility of the company? It's the time the moment you walk out of your door, that you're going to a place that's not your normal place of work. So if you get mugged, if something bad happens to you on the way to that conference, if it happens when you're at the conference or when you're on your way home from the conference, it's all the responsibility of the company, and the business needs to be aware of that.
Right, okay. Neil is saying here, we have policies but geared towards health and safety, not geared to security and safeguarding assets. Yeah, that's probably
And I've been saying for a long time that actually if we could actually link security to health and safety, we'd be in a much better place, because most companies are very, very willing to spend money on health and safety because they have to, because there's legislation, but actually are much more reluctant to spend money on security, even though you have a duty of care to your member of staff on a security basis. And if you take this to the next level, and I know this is a little way off now, but if you are sending people overseas and you're sending them to Paris as an example, and they get caught up in the riots over there, or you send in one of your staff and they take their family with them, and their family are caught up, where does the company's responsibility come in? Security?
Yeah. I mean, someone here is saying the way we do business and travel, as you're suggesting, will have changed forever, and I think that's right as well. And Paul is saying many have working from home policy, but it will definitely need rewording following COVID-19. I think that's not the only thing that's going to need to be redone following COVID-19. I think our whole society is going to change.
Well, I think we'll see less travel, won't we? Because people
Yeah,
are now working out how to use these.
We won't be able to afford to. If many airlines go bust, as it seems they might, then I'm sure airline tickets are going to be very expensive. I don't know anything about this. What about the regulators? Neil is saying, will we see the regulators such as the PCI and the DSS amend their compliance assessments to facilitate working from home? Well, I'm guessing they will, but that's purely speculative on my part.
Yeah, I think they've already will have done this, and I think there are many companies that do have people working from home on a regular basis. In fact, you see it nowadays. Many more offices have hot desking because they've got far more staff than they've got than they need office days. So they're, people are obviously working away from that place much more than ever before. And if you go into London on a Friday, you'll know that the tubes and trains are empty because a lot of people work from home on a Friday, it seems.
Indeed. Chris, time is running short. We have to finish quite soon. And I know there are people who want to know about the kind of physical security dealing with lockdown. So I've got a question here. With lockdown, lots of empty shops and offices, what should firms be doing to make sure these are secure? And just hold that thought. And then Chris is saying, it looks like in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll be moving into a phased recovery period. What are your thoughts on physical security? What should it look like during the recovery phase? And how can businesses balance the right physical security with being mindful of health security as well? I'm sorry, Chris, lots of big questions there.
No, I think and they're really valid, and I think we are going to see shops and other businesses starting to reopen with a skeleton staff half the time. And I think what all companies need to start doing is thinking through their physical security, whether it's CCTV, whether it's manned guarding, and whether the guarding companies are going to have enough people to actually assist those that require it. And I think many more companies will require it. We see now a lot of the small shops actually employing a security guard outside to monitor those people going in. Now, if other companies are going to have to do that as well, then they're going to need to get in touch with the security guarding companies fairly quickly to not only make sure that those security guarding companies have got, whether you've got a contract with them in the first place, or whether you need to take a new contract, reconsider the number of security personnel you're going to require. We will get a spike in crime at the end of this. We will get additional burglaries. I don't think there's any doubt in that. And you're gonna have to bear in mind that this rise in crime is going to require a bigger security presence. And what we've seen and what we've already discussed is there's going to be a lack of police officers to deal with it. So it's in your lap, I think, to think now through the security remit of your security guarding, whether you need more, whether you need to extend the hours, change the hours of those that you've got, but certainly start talking to your security guarding companies as soon as possible.
I mean, there's a good thoughts and questions from Paul on this subject. He says, I'd welcome thoughts on the public realm of security patrolling or guarding. Some guards are willing to go to work while others aren't, leaving a real issue for employers, risking discord within the ranks of security staff. How are employers to position themselves when some security staff simply refuse to go to work due to COVID-19? Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is, but it's right across the piece, isn't it? I think we will find an awful lot of people will be very reluctant to go back to work at the end of this, and I think companies need to be talking to their staff. But I'll go back to this thing again. Make sure that you are talking to your security guarding suppliers. If you've got one, if you haven't got one, then you need to get onto them as quickly as possible to decide whether or not you need people there to look after your premises.
Okay, good. All right, Chris, let's move this along a little bit here. Let's take you back to your old job for a second. Well, I don't know, it's still your job. I don't say your old job. The terror threat. I mean, for reasons that we've already talked about a little bit, it seems to have decreased. But what's your take on the current terror threat?
Well, the good news is that we did have a reduction in the terror threat levels, but what we've got now is a slightly different scenario. The last 4 or 5 weeks, we've had people sitting in their bedrooms, playing on the internet, playing on the computer, and potentially being ripe for radicalisation. We've already had one of the senior police officers has talked about this. Most of the reports of people becoming radicalised previously over the last 2 or 3 years have come from teachers, they've come from doctors, they've come from people within families that have recognised those that are becoming radicalised. Those have slowed down because obviously those same people aren't having the interaction with their students, etc. So what we've got is a potential ticking time bomb, really, of people that are becoming radicalised online, out of the sight of everyone that would normally report them. And of course, whilst at the moment we haven't got any crowded places, we will have again in the future. And I think this is something that that the police are having to deal with. I think it's incumbent on all of us to be able to recognise those that are becoming radicalised and make sure that they get the reports in if they find anything out, if they hear anything.
I mean, it's a slight worry, I suppose, with so many people dying from COVID-19. I mean, will the money be around for anti-terrorism work after this is over? There's got to be a question on that.
Well, it's one of those situations that they will feel the squeeze. I'm sure that taxes are going to go up, and someone's going to pay for all this stuff in the future. But more concerning, really, is the fact that we are going to get back to normal at some stage. But we also have got groups of people, and they will have a narrative. You know, the terrorists will form a narrative around this. This COVID-19 is attacking BAME, black and mixed race people more than it's attacking the white community. It is, and we don't exactly know why yet. I've not seen a valid excuse as to why that is. But that will be a narrative that forms that will be they'll try to use it to infect the minds of those people that might want to go and commit terrorist attacks. So we've got to be aware of that. We've got to keep our eye on the ball. We've got to remember that we're in a very unusual position at the moment, and at the end of this, the world is going to change dramatically.
Okay, I mean, I know you hesitate to talk about things cyber related and so forth, Chris, but Steve has asked the question, what's Chris's take on the threat from cyber attacks during this crisis? Do you have anything further to say on that?
I think it's not just this crisis, actually. I think we know that cyber attacks are multiplying. Every year there's huge numbers of extra cyber attacks and aimed at different groups. We've seen governments, we've seen without doubt the Russian government have launched cyber attacks. The Chinese have been doing similar sorts of things. So right down from governments down to individuals sitting in their room, attacking companies, attacking individuals, trying to make some money out of this. We've seen it already. You know, stoking up the fear of COVID with people, trying to get individuals to pay money out. We've seen it, and it's not going to go away. And companies have just got to make sure they're protecting themselves. And part of that is making sure they've got the right protection around their cyber security. And you know, there are lots of companies out there. I'm not going to mention any in particular, but you really do need to be protecting yourself from this.
Yeah, jumping back again, because we got questions coming in on terrorism. We got sort of counter views, or well, not counter, but sort of different views from Basil, who says the capacity to fight terrorism will be impacted as limited resources are redirected to assist the COVID response and recovery effort. Whereas Steve says, surely the question is, can we afford not to find the money for counter-terrorism after COVID-19 is over? So I guess, you know, different countries, different governments will take a view on that as to which way they're going to go. Any bets which way it's going to go, Chris?
Well, I think, you know, we're in a bit of a suck it and see situation. I think what we've got to be aware of is that you know, our security services are picking up the threats. You know, even this pandemic was seen high on the threat risk of the country many years ago when I was there. It was always seen as a threat, but it comes down to the governments and how they choose to spend their money. Now, terrorism has recently seen an increase in spending, but I can tell you when I first moved into NATSO, MI5 grew by a third, I think it was, and since I've gone, they shrunk back to their normal size, their original size, and are now growing again. So the way the threats are seen and how the governments choose to spend their money are a lot down to this. And terrorism will be right up there. There's no doubt about that. But there may be other things that pop up that are equally or even more of an immediate threat.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. Neil asks an optimistic question, I think. And as we're drawing to a close here, I think we can use a little bit of optimism. On the flip side, what opportunities do we see falling out from the current situation for the security professional? Well, I'm guessing a bit more work, I suppose. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, no, Neil, it's always good to see a bit of positivity. And you're right, because this has brought positives. They're difficult to see when you're in the middle of it. But I think what I would personally like to see is the continuing professionalization of the security industry, the growth. There will be a growth. There's no doubt about that. There will be a growth in numbers of places that actually need to be secured. So there's a growth opportunity for the security industry. But it's quite difficult at this moment when you're in the depth of this to see positives for society. But I'm sure they will come.
Indeed, indeed. All right, well, we're almost there, but I'm just going to have a little bit of fun now. We're going to launch our final poll. And here we go. How are you feeling about the prospect of going back to the office, guys? Is this? So we've got can't wait, very concerned, a little bit concerned, I won't use public transport, and I'm not going anywhere until there's a vaccine. So you don't have to take this too seriously from me, but I just thought there must be some people there who are just desperate to I think Steve's wife is desperate to get back into the office.
Can I say where this has brought out, whilst people are doing this, it is the need for crisis management teams, crisis management bits of the organisation, and communications within a crisis. All these sort of things that we've often put to the back. Business continuity plans. Who wants to do those? It's seen as a downside to business. But crisis management, managing these types of incidents, and particularly making sure the company can bounce back afterwards, is such a key part of an organisation. And I think after this, we should all make sure we pay a lot more attention to it.
Okay. Oh, Joanna's telling me off again. Oh, Joanna, I'm sorry I'm annoying you. She says, last poll, none of the above is unemployed. So I apologize if people have become, as I know many people have become unemployed. I do feel bad for you there, but I forgot to use that, I'm afraid. But I'm just going to show you, I'm sharing the results now. So what do we got here? So 36% of our listeners can't wait to get back in the office. 14% are very concerned and probably wouldn't want to. 39%, yeah, that's the biggest, isn't it? Yeah, a little concerned. 4%, I won't use public transport. And 7%, I'm not going anywhere until there's a vaccine. Any final thoughts on this, or indeed anything else, Chris?
No, I think I've really enjoyed that hour. I hope everyone else has as well. It's really just about putting things into your mind, really. And if I can leave you just with this crisis management thing, whilst this was on the crisis radar for the government, they didn't do enough, did they? I mean, we all know that none of the governments have done enough to prepare for this particular crisis. Well, when you go back to business as normal, or however we end up with this, it is well worth getting into your crisis management plans, getting into your business continuity plans, and making sure that they are fit for purpose. Because this stuff that comes out in left field will hit another company on another day, and it's best to be prepared.
All right, great. We're getting some very nice messages here. Great session, thoroughly enjoyed it. People seem to have really enjoyed this hour, and frankly, Chris, I've really enjoyed it as well. It's been a great discussion. We've had great questions here. So basically, it just leaves for me to say thank you very much for joining us. We'll be running another YUDU Sentinel webinar in a month's time. Don't know who the guest is going to be. If there's anybody out there who would like to be a guest, who has a particular take on crisis management or indeed on the current situation, then by all means get in touch and we can see if we can schedule you in. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to Chris. And that's it, folks. I'm just going to wish you all goodbye now, and until we meet again. Bye-bye now. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Bye-bye.